You've been replaced." That was how my husband of 29 years introduced the woman standing beside him in our foyer. Then she dropped an empty suitcase at my feet and said, "Pack whatever junk you want and get out." I looked at Mark. He smiled. For about 3 seconds, I honestly thought I had misunderstood what was happening. It was a Thursday evening in early October, a little after 6. I had just come back from Kroger with 2 bags of groceries, a gallon of milk, and the rotisserie chicken Mark liked to pick apart while standing at the kitchen counter. Nothing about the day had warned me that my marriage was about to end before dinner. I was still holding my car keys when Mark stepped aside and let her walk farther into the house. She was younger than me, mid-30s maybe, dark hair curled over one shoulder, cream-colored coat, tall boots that clicked against the hardwood floor I had spent a Saturday picking out 12 years earlier. She looked around like a buyer at an open house. "This is actually nicer than I expected," she said. That hurt more than it should have. Not because I cared whether she liked my house, because she said it like she had every right to judge it. I set the grocery bags down on the little bench by the door. "Mark," I said, "who is she?" He sighed as though I was slowing down a meeting. "This is Vanessa." Vanessa gave me a small smile. Not friendly. More like she had already won something. Mark put one hand into his pocket. Then he said very calmly, "Vanessa and I are together. She's moving in." I stared at him. Moving in where? He actually looked irritated. "Here, Patty." I laughed once, not because anything was funny. Sometimes your body does strange things when your brain is trying to catch up. "You brought your girlfriend into our home and told her she's moving in?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Vanessa folded her arms. Then she glanced toward the living room. "I told him we should have done this differently." For half a second, I almost respected her for that. Then she added, "But honestly, dragging it out would have been worse." That ended that. I looked at Mark again. I had known that man since I was 23 years old. I knew how he scratched the side of his nose when he was lying. I knew how he got quiet when he was scared. I knew which shoulder hurt when rain was coming. And still, standing there in front of me, he looked like somebody I had met 5 minutes earlier. He nodded toward Vanessa. "She actually knows how to make a man feel appreciated." There it was, the sentence designed to hurt. I felt it land. Not in some dramatic movie way. It was smaller than that, sharper, like catching your finger on a broken piece of glass. Vanessa looked down at my sweater, then at my sneakers. I had worn those shoes to the grocery store because my knees had been bothering me all week. Mark kept going. "You stopped acting like a wife years ago, Patty. Maybe this should have happened sooner." I didn't answer, because suddenly I wasn't looking at 56-year-old Mark. I was remembering 27-year-old Mark standing beside me outside our first rental duplex in Broad Ripple, holding a pizza box, and grinning because we had exactly $43 left until payday. Back then, I thought surviving hard things together meant something. Apparently, it only meant something to me. Vanessa walked toward the stairs. "I'll need the closet cleared out tonight." I turned. "Excuse me?" She pointed at the suitcase near my feet. "Just take what you need. Clothes, toiletries, whatever. The rest can be handled later." I looked at the suitcase, then at her, then back at Mark. He didn't stop her. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not healed, not hardened, just changed. I nodded. "Fine." Vanessa blinked. Mark frowned. I think they had both expected yelling, maybe crying, maybe me grabbing onto Mark's sleeve and asking him how he could do this after almost 30 years. Instead, I picked up the suitcase and carried it upstairs. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble opening the bedroom closet. I didn't pack much. 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, underwear, my medication, the old gray cardigan I wore when hotel air conditioning got too cold. Then I took my laptop bag from the home office, my mother's jewelry box from the top shelf, and 1 thick folder from the small fireproof safe. I stood in the bedroom for a few seconds before leaving. The room looked exactly the same. Bed made, Mark's reading glasses on the nightstand, my slippers near the dresser. It bothered me that ordinary things could sit there so calmly while my life had just split in half. When I came back downstairs, Vanessa was in my kitchen opening cabinets. She held up one of my old ceramic mugs. "These can probably go." I looked at her. "They were my mother's." She froze. For the first time, she looked embarrassed. "Sorry," Mark glanced at the clock. "Patty, let's not turn everything into a sentimental issue." I almost said something cruel. I wanted to. Instead, I picked up my keys. "You won't have to worry about me making anything difficult tonight." Mark relaxed. That told me everything. Outside, the October air had turned cold. Linda Foster, my neighbor across the street, was dragging her trash can toward the garage. She stopped when she saw the suitcase. Then she saw my face. She crossed the street without even putting on a coat. "Patty?" I opened the back of my Subaru. Linda lowered her voice. "What happened?" I swallowed. "Apparently I've been replaced." Her mouth fell open. She looked toward the house. "Do you want to stay with me?" I shook my head. Not because I didn't love Linda, because I couldn't bear sitting 10 houses away from Mark and Vanessa all night. "I need somewhere neutral." "Call me," she said. "I will." I drove south toward Indianapolis and checked into a Hampton Inn near Keystone Crossing. Room 417, king bed, beige carpet, tiny coffee machine, a framed photograph of Monument Circle on the wall. I sat on the edge of the bed without taking off my coat. For nearly 10 minutes, I just stared at the floor. Then I cried, quietly. I cried for the woman I had been at 25, for the mortgage payments, for Christmas mornings, for all the years I had mistaken being needed for being loved. Around 11:40 that night, I opened my laptop. I typed an email to Ethan Morales, the attorney who had handled my business paperwork for more than 15 years. "Mark moved another woman into the house tonight and told me to leave. I need to know what I can legally protect tomorrow." I read it twice. Then I hit send. At 7:08 the next morning, Ethan called. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked one question. "Patty, do you remember what we did after Mark's development company nearly collapsed 8 years ago?" I looked out the hotel window at commuters moving along Keystone Avenue. "Yes." There was a pause. Then Ethan said, "Good, because I don't think Mark remembers nearly as much as you do." And that was when I realized something. For years, Mark had walked around acting like he owned our entire life. But almost everything, keeping that life standing, had been held together by my credit, my income, my records, and my name. Ethan's first instruction was simple. Do not touch anything out of anger. I was sitting at the little desk in room 417 with hotel coffee cooling beside me. What exactly does that mean? It means don't empty accounts. Don't cancel anything just because you can. Don't send Mark a message you'll regret later. And don't assume your name on an asset means a judge will automatically hand it to you. That last part pulled me out of the revenge fantasy I hadn't even realized I was starting to have. I rubbed my forehead. So what do? We document. That became the word of the day, document. By 9 that morning, I was in Ethan's office on Meridian Street with my laptop, tax returns, copies of deeds, business records, insurance statements, and 2 yellow legal pads. Ethan had handled enough of my financial messes over the years that nothing shocked him easily. Still, when I finished explaining how Mark had brought Vanessa into the house, he leaned back and took off his glasses. "He actually moved her in while you were still living there?" "Yes." "And told you to leave?" "Yes." "And she threw a suitcase at you?" I nodded. He stared at me for a second. "That is aggressively stupid." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It was the first time I had laughed since the night before. Then Ethan got serious again, and he went through everything piece by piece. My bookkeeping company was mine, though it would still need proper valuation because we were married. The money I had inherited from my mother had remained in a separate account, which helped. Several investments were traceable to that inheritance. The Subaru was in my name. The Range Rover Mark drove was owned by my business and had been assigned to him when he still handled client development work for me. That one made Ethan stop. "He's still using it? Every day? Is he still doing work for your company?" "No." "Then we need to arrange a lawful return." I pictured Vanessa sitting in the passenger seat, probably assuming it belonged to Mark. I felt a small, ugly flicker of satisfaction. Then I felt guilty for enjoying it. Ethan seemed to read my face. You're allowed to be angry, Patty. I know. Just don't let anger become your attorney. That was very Ethan, dry enough to be annoying, smart enough to be right. By lunchtime we had a plan, not revenge, protection. I would stop paying Mark's personal bills, his personal credit cards, his private club membership, the storage unit he used for business equipment, the subscriptions he had added to my accounts, his personal insurance add-ons, anything I was not legally required to keep covering. For years I had paid those things automatically, sometimes because it was easier, sometimes because Mark forgot, sometimes because he would say, "Can you just handle it, Patty?" I always handled it, that was the problem. Back at the hotel, I opened our online banking dashboard and began making a list. I didn't move money that afternoon. I didn't shut off the house utilities. I didn't touch anything that could create trouble later. I simply removed myself from the role of unpaid financial rescue crew. 4 days passed. Mark didn't call, neither did Vanessa. On Sunday morning, Linda brought me breakfast from Bob Evans and sat across from me in the hotel lobby. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you. I mean emotionally. That's much better." She pushed a container of scrambled eggs toward me. "You need to eat." I picked at them. Linda had been widowed 6 years earlier. She had a way of talking about pain without turning it into a ceremony. "You keep checking your phone," she said. "I know." "You waiting for him to apologize?" "No," she raised one eyebrow. I looked down. "Maybe." Linda didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. That hurt more than if she'd given me advice. Because the truth was, some part of me still wanted Mark to call and say he had lost his mind. I wanted him to say Vanessa was gone, that he was sorry, that 29 years had meant more than one humiliating evening in October. Instead, on Tuesday afternoon, he texted me, "Did you freeze the visa?" That was it. No hello, no apology, just the visa. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I laughed. A sad little laugh this time. The card hadn't been frozen. His payment had failed because I had stopped transferring money into the account that covered it. 2 days later, Ethan arranged for the Range Rover to be returned to my business. Mark responded with 3 angry texts and 1 voicemail. "You're being ridiculous, Patty. Vanessa and I need transportation." Vanessa and I. Like they were a household now. Like I was the unreasonable landlord shutting off heat in winter. I didn't answer. The following week, one of his country club charges bounced. Then a personal line of credit payment came due. Then another card stopped working. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. That was almost worse. Mark's life began shrinking by inches. One overdue notice at a time. Meanwhile, I was still living out of 2 suitcases, still waking up at 3:30 in the morning, still reaching toward the other side of a hotel bed out of habit. People imagine revenge feels exciting. Mostly, I felt tired. By the 2nd week, I moved out of the Hampton and into Linda's guest room. She had floral wallpaper, a ceiling fan that clicked every 3rd rotation, and a mattress that had apparently survived the Reagan administration. I slept better there than I had in the hotel. Then, one Thursday night, somebody pounded on Linda's front door. 3 hard knocks. I knew who it was before she opened it. Mark stood on the porch in jeans and a Colt sweatshirt, looking furious. He didn't ask if he could come in. "Where did you move the money?" Linda looked at me. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What money?" "Don't play games." His face was red. "I can't access half the accounts. The cards are declining. The Range Rover is gone. What did you do?" I stared at him. There were so many things I wanted to say. Instead, one thing came out. "You haven't asked me once if I'm okay." He blinked. "What?" "You haven't asked where I'm staying. You haven't asked if I have what I need. You haven't even asked whether I got home safely that night." Mark let out a frustrated breath. "Patty, don't make this emotional." I almost smiled. There it was, 30 years of marriage reduced to 1 sentence. "Why did you come here, Mark?" He looked away. "I need to know where the money is." I nodded slowly. "Exactly." He rubbed both hands over his face. "This is our money." "Then your attorney can ask mine about it." "Come on." "No." "Patty." "No." For the first time, I heard something unfamiliar in my own voice. Not rage, finality. I opened the door. Mark said, "You're going to regret making this difficult." I turned back. I think I've already regretted enough for both of us. Then I went inside. My knees were shaking so badly Linda had to hand me a glass of water. The next morning, Ethan called at 8:13. His voice sounded different, tighter. "Patty, we found something in one of the old development files." I sat down at Linda's kitchen table. "What kind of something?" "A loan from 7 years ago. There may still be a cross-collateral connection to one of your LLCs. I stopped breathing for a second. "How bad?" "I don't know yet." That scared me more than any number could have, because for the first time since leaving Mark, this wasn't about watching his life collapse. There was a chance he could drag part of mine down with him. I had spent most of my adult life believing that if I kept good records, paid bills on time, and never signed anything I hadn't read twice, I could protect myself from financial disasters. By Friday afternoon, I wasn't so sure. Ethan spread the old loan documents across his conference table. "This is the problem." He tapped a paragraph halfway down page 17. I leaned closer. Cross-collateralization? Possibly. That sounds expensive. It can be. 7 years earlier, Mark had borrowed money for a small development project north of Westfield. 12 townhomes. Nothing huge, at least that was how he'd described it. What I hadn't understood was how aggressively he had borrowed against other business interests when the project ran short on cash. One old LLC had briefly connected one of my commercial properties to the lending structure. How much exposure? We're still determining that. Worst case, Ethan hesitated. About $190,000. I sat back. For once I didn't have a clever response. $190,000 wasn't going to put me on the street, but it was enough to hurt, enough to delay retirement, enough to erase years of careful saving because my husband had decided paperwork was something other people worried about. That night, Linda and I carried 4 banker boxes from my storage unit into her dining room. At 67, she should not have been lifting boxes. At 54, apparently neither should I. Halfway through the second one, my left knee made a sound like somebody stepping on bubble wrap. Linda looked at me. That sounded expensive. Everything sounds expensive this week. We worked until nearly 2 in the morning. Old closing statements, bank correspondence, tax returns, loan amendments. I had spent years organizing other people's businesses, yet there I was wearing reading glasses over tired eyes, searching through my own past for a document that might save me. Around 1:30, Linda went to bed. I kept going. At some point, I found an old photograph tucked inside a folder. Mark and me at a Colts game. He had his arm around my shoulders. We looked happy. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "You need to fix this before you destroy both of us." I almost threw the phone across the room. Both of us. He had brought another woman into our home, thrown me out, and somehow I was still responsible for preventing his collapse. For one dangerous minute, I considered calling him. Maybe we could untangle everything together. Maybe if I helped him stabilize the debts, the divorce could stay civilized. Then I realized what I was doing. Rescuing him. Again, I put the phone face down. At 2:07 a.m., I found the document. It was an amendment from when I refinanced the commercial property through my company. I remembered the meeting because Mark had complained the entire time. Ethan had insisted on removing that property from the collateral structure. At the bottom was the bank officer's signature. I took a picture and texted Ethan, "Sorry about the hour, look at page 3. He answered 11 minutes later, "I hate you." Then another message appeared. "But I think you found it." I laughed so loudly Linda called from upstairs. "You alive?" "I think so." "Then laugh quieter." By Monday, Ethan had confirmed it. The bank still needed documentation and there were details to resolve, but the property itself appeared protected. I sat in my car afterward and cried. Not because I had won, because for 3 days I had genuinely believed 30 years of Mark's carelessness might reach out and take something I had built without him. The relief lasted until Wednesday. Ethan called me back to his office. This time, there was only one folder on his desk. "Before I show you this," he said, "I need you not to jump to conclusions. That is never a comforting introduction." He turned the document toward me. It was a refinancing application from several months earlier. Mark's name was there, so was mine. I stared at the signature. "That's not my signature." "You're certain?" "I've been signing checks since before you had gray hair, Ethan. That is not my signature." The notary section made my stomach tighten. I had never met the notary listed, never attended that closing, never approved the refinance. What happens now? "We document everything properly. Original records, electronic history, notary records. We don't accuse anybody until we know exactly what happened." "You think Mark forged it?" "I think we establish facts first." That was Ethan's way of telling me yes without telling me yes. Then he opened another spreadsheet. "I also finished the preliminary debt review." I looked at the total. For a second, I thought there had to be an extra zero. 580,000? Approximately. I looked again. Unsecured business loans, personal guarantees, tax liabilities, credit lines, 2 failed real estate ventures I barely knew existed. How did I not know about this? Ethan folded his hands. "You knew the household finances, you knew the businesses you managed." He paused. "Apparently Mark had another financial life." I sat there listening to the air conditioner hum. The affair suddenly seemed almost simple. Another woman, another relationship. I understood betrayal like that. But this? This meant that while I was packing lunches, paying property taxes, contributing to retirement accounts, and telling myself we were finally secure, Mark had been digging a hole behind my back. My phone rang before I left Ethan's office. Vanessa. I almost declined it. Then curiosity won. "Hello?" For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, she said, "Patty?" Her voice sounded nothing like the woman who had thrown a suitcase at my feet. "What do you want?" "I need to ask you something." "Ask Mark." I did. And? "He keeps changing the answer." I leaned against Ethan's receptionist counter. "What question?" She lowered her voice. "How much money does Mark actually have?" I closed my eyes. "I'm not discussing finances with you." The country club called. "His cards aren't working. Somebody came by about a loan yesterday." "That sounds like something you should discuss with your boyfriend." "He said you're doing this." "Of course he did." Then Vanessa said something that made me go still. "He told me not to worry because you'd fix it." I opened my eyes. "What?" He said, "Patty will fix it. She always does." For years I had thought Mark saw my competence as something he respected. Standing there with the phone pressed against my ear, I finally understood. He had started seeing it as insurance against his own behavior. Vanessa took a shaky breath. "Patty, I think Mark lied to both of us." I looked through the glass doors toward the parking lot. "No, Vanessa." My voice was quieter than I expected. "He lied to you." Then I added, "I think he counted on me." Vanessa asked if we could meet in person. My first instinct was no. Actually, my first instinct was something less polite than no. This was the woman who had walked into my kitchen, inspected my coffee mugs, and informed me that my closet needed to be cleared out for her. Now she wanted coffee. Life has a strange sense of humor. We agreed on a Panera off US 31 in Carmel at 10 the next morning. Public place, daylight, no drama. I got there early and ordered coffee. Vanessa walked in 12 minutes late. I almost didn't recognize her. No cream-colored coat, no tall boots, no carefully curled hair. She wore black leggings, sneakers, and a gray sweatshirt. Her hair was tied back. She looked younger and tired. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I haven't decided whether I'm staying." She nodded. "Fair enough." Vanessa sat across from me, but I didn't order anything. For a few seconds, she kept folding and unfolding the corner of a napkin. Finally, she said, "He told me the house was his." I said nothing. "He said he'd bought it before you really started making money." Not true. "He said he owned 3 rental properties." Not exactly. Her face tightened. "He said the Range Rover was his." "That one wasn't even close." She stared down at the table, then came the part I wasn't expecting. He told me you depended on him. I stopped lifting my coffee. What? He said you couldn't afford to leave. Something cold settled in my stomach. Vanessa kept talking. He said he paid for everything. He said your little bookkeeping business barely made anything. My little bookkeeping business. I had 12 employees. We handled payroll and financial records for dozens of local businesses. Mark knew exactly what it earned. I leaned back. What else? Vanessa looked uncomfortable. Patty. What else? He said you were getting confused. I stared at her. With money. That one landed differently. I could tolerate being called boring, old, unattractive, a bad wife. Those were insults. But confused? Mark knew my mother had developed dementia before she died. He knew how terrified I had been every time I misplaced my keys afterward. And he had used that fear to make his affair sound reasonable. Vanessa must have seen something change in my face. I didn't know whether to believe that part. But you believed enough. She looked down. Yes. At least she didn't pretend otherwise. I knew he was married, she said. I'm not going to insult you by pretending I didn't. Good. I thought your marriage was already over. It wasn't. I know that now. I took a sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm. Then Vanessa surprised me. I'm sorry about the suitcase. I almost laughed. Of all the things she could apologize for. The suitcase? I was showing off. For whom? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Mark, of course. I wanted him to see I wasn't intimidated by you. And were you? She finally looked at me. Yes. That answer was honest enough that I believed it. I didn't forgive her, not then. But she stopped looking like a cartoon villain sitting across from me. She looked like a 35-year-old woman who had made an ugly choice and was beginning to understand the price. How much debt? She asked. Ask Mark. He won't tell me. Then that's information too. She nodded slowly. Before we left, she said, he keeps telling me you'll come around. I stood and pulled on my coat. He's been telling himself that for 30 years. 3 weeks later, Mark's attorney accused me of deliberately dismantling our finances to punish him. The mediation was held in a conference room downtown. Mark sat across from me in a navy suit I had bought him for our niece's wedding. He looked older, not ruined, just tired. His attorney, a man named Keller, argued that I had spent years positioning assets under my control. Ethan didn't get defensive. He opened a binder. Let's establish when that restructuring began. Tax returns, bank letters, loan denials, documents from Mark's failed development project 8 years earlier. Then emails. One was from Mark himself. Ethan read it aloud. Put whatever you need in Patty's name. I don't understand this crap. Silence. I looked down because I was afraid I might laugh. Across the table, even Mr. Keller seemed annoyed with his own client. Mark leaned toward him. That was taken out of context. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The context is 3 pages long. You're welcome to read it. That was Ethan's version of sarcasm. Then he brought out the refinancing application. The mood changed immediately. He slid a copy across the table. Mr. Reynolds, we're still verifying the history of this document, so I'm not making an accusation. Mark looked at it. His face lost color. Ethan continued. Mrs. Reynolds states that she did not sign this. Mark said nothing. Do you know why her signature appears here? I'd have to look at it. You are looking at it. Mark glanced toward his attorney. Keller picked up the page. Let's take a break. Nobody argued. Outside the conference room, I sat on a bench beside the elevators. My hands were cold, not triumphant, cold. This had stopped feeling like a marriage dispute. Mark walked past me without speaking. Vanessa was waiting near the lobby. She stood when she saw him. What happened? Not here. Mark, what happened? He kept walking. Vanessa followed. Then she stopped and looked back at me. I could see the answer beginning to form on her face. The big house, the Range Rover, the dinners, the watch, the stories. All those things had made Mark look wealthy. But wealth had never been the thing holding his life together. Someone else had been doing that. Me. And now I wasn't. By the end of that week, Vanessa had moved out of the Carmel house. Linda called me after seeing a white SUV in the driveway. She has boxes. I was standing in the cereal aisle at Meijer. Are you spying on my husband? I prefer neighborhood awareness. Despite myself, I smiled. What kind of boxes? Patty. What? You asked. I laughed. Then Linda's voice softened. She looks miserable. For a moment, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, pity, not enough to invite Vanessa over for Thanksgiving. But enough to understand that consequences don't always need applause. Sometimes they just arrive. That evening, Ethan called. The divorce negotiations were moving forward. Mark wanted a settlement. He's asking what it would take for you to end this quickly, Ethan said. I looked around Linda's guest room. 2 suitcases, my mother's jewelry box, a stack of legal folders. For the first time, I realized how tired I was. Part of me wanted to say yes to almost anything. Then Ethan added, Before you decide, Patty, I think you should go back to the house and collect the rest of your personal belongings. I didn't know it yet, but that trip would be harder than anything Mark or Vanessa had done to me, because betrayal is easy to hate when it's standing in front of you. Memory isn't. The house smelled the same. That was the first thing that got me. Not the silence, not the missing Range Rover, not the fact that Vanessa's white SUV was gone. It was the smell, coffee, old wood, and the cinnamon candle I used to light in the kitchen every October. I stood inside the front door with my hand still on the knob. For a moment, my body expected Mark to call from upstairs. Instead, nothing happened. The visit had been arranged through our attorneys, Mark was gone for the afternoon, and I had 3 hours to collect personal belongings. I started upstairs. My knees were especially bad that day. Stress did that, so did Indiana weather. Halfway up, I stopped and held the railing. There had been a time when I could carry a sleeping child up those stairs without thinking about it. Now I needed a railing just to carry myself. That thought irritated me more than it saddened me. The bedroom looked different. Vanessa had moved things. Her things were gone now, but I could see where they'd been. My jewelry tray had been pushed into a drawer. Mark's clothes were scattered across the chair. 2 wine glasses sat on the dresser. I wanted to throw them against the wall. Instead, I put them in the dishwasher. 30 years of habit is hard to kill. I packed photographs, my grandmother's quilt, books, and a cedar box of letters. Then I found our wedding album. It was underneath several magazines in the bottom of the closet. I sat on the floor. Big mistake. My knees immediately informed me that getting back up would require negotiations. Still, I opened it. There I was, 25 years old, about 30 pounds lighter. Hair bigger than it had any right to be. Mark stood beside me in a rented tuxedo, smiling like he'd just won the lottery. In one picture, he was whispering something into my ear. I remembered what he'd said. If this cake falls over, we're going to McDonald's. I laughed when I saw it. Then I started crying, not pretty tears. The kind where your nose runs and you have to wipe your face with the sleeve of your sweater because tissues are downstairs. I wasn't crying because I wanted Mark back. That surprised me. I was crying for her. The woman in the photograph. She thought love meant staying. She thought sacrifice earned loyalty. She thought if she worked hard enough, forgave enough, organized enough, and carried enough, eventually somebody would notice how much she had done. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes. Then my phone rang. Linda. You okay? How did you know? You've been there 2 hours. I found the wedding album. She was quiet. I almost want to give him what he wants, I admitted. What does he want? A quick settlement, fewer arguments. Maybe I should just let him have more and be done. Linda took a breath. Then she said something I wrote down later because I didn't want to forget it. Being tired isn't the same as being wrong. I looked at the photograph again. No. No what? No, it isn't. The settlement conference happened 11 days later. There was no dramatic judge banging a gavel, no courtroom full of spectators. Real divorces are usually less cinematic and more fluorescent. Conference rooms, legal pads, bad coffee, numbers. Mark wanted the Carmel house. That surprised me. I thought he wanted money. Apparently losing Vanessa had changed something. Maybe the house was the last piece of his old image he could still picture himself keeping. His attorney argued that it was marital property. Ethan agreed that title alone didn't settle the issue. That mattered. I wasn't magically entitled to everything because paperwork had my name on it. But paperwork did matter. So did where money came from, so did the debt, so did my business. So did the records I'd kept for years. After hours of negotiation, we reached the structure that finally made sense. I would keep the house. Mark would retain certain remaining interests in his development ventures. I would give up claims to several assets I didn't want. He would remain responsible for the substantial personal guarantees and liabilities tied to his ventures, subject to the final agreement and lender rights. Those obligations totaled roughly $580,000. Not because I handed him the debt, because he had signed for it. When the agreement was finally outlined, Mark stared at the papers, then at me. "You're really going to keep the house?" "Yes." "You don't even need that much space." I almost laughed. "You moved another woman into it." He looked away. "That was a mistake." I waited. For an apology. Some habits die slowly. None came. Outside the courthouse later, the November wind cut straight through my coat. Vanessa was standing near the steps. I hadn't expected her. Mark saw her and stopped. "What are you doing here?" "I came for some things you left at my apartment." She held out a small box. He took it without thanking her. Then he walked toward the parking garage. Vanessa stayed. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. She looked at me. "I thought I was taking your place." There wasn't much arrogance left in her. I tightened my coat around myself. There was never a place to take. She swallowed. "I know what I did was wrong." "Yes." "I really thought—" She stopped. "That he was rich?" A miserable little laugh escaped her. "That too." I looked toward the garage where Mark had disappeared. "You didn't steal my life, Vanessa." She looked up. "You inherited his lies." Her eyes filled. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her everything was okay. It wasn't. But I didn't hate her anymore either. That felt better than I expected. I reached my Subaru just as Mark called my name. He hurried across the sidewalk. "Patty." I turned. He stood there, holding Vanessa's box. For the first time in all the years I'd known him, Mark looked genuinely lost. What am I supposed to do now? The question hit an old reflex. Immediately my mind started working. Call the bank, restructure the debt, sell this, negotiate that, make a spreadsheet, fix it. I could almost feel 30 years of muscle memory pulling me toward him. Then I stopped. I looked at the man I'd spent most of my adult life protecting from consequences. "I don't know, Mark." He stared at me. I opened the car door. "Talk to your attorney." Then I got in. As I pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. Mark was still standing on the courthouse steps. A year earlier, I would have turned around. 6 months earlier, I would have made a phone call. That afternoon, I kept driving. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Mark had a problem, and I let it remain his. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I bought myself a recliner. That probably doesn't sound like a declaration of independence, but you didn't know Mark. For years, whenever I suggested getting one for the family room, he'd make a face. "Those are for old people." Apparently, turning 54, developing bad knees, and spending 30 years married to him still hadn't qualified me. So one Saturday morning in March, Linda and I drove to a furniture store in Castleton. I tried 6 recliners. Linda sat in every one beside me like we were testing luxury cars. When I finally found one that supported my lower back properly, she nodded. "That's the one." "It's ugly. Patty, we're past suffering for aesthetics." That chair became one of my favorite things in the house. And yes, I know how that sounds. The house itself took longer. When I first moved back in, I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. The rooms were too quiet. The refrigerator sounded ridiculously loud at night. For almost a month, I slept badly. Sometimes I'd wake at 4:30 and reach toward the other side of the bed before remembering there was nobody there. Other mornings, I would hear a car door outside and instinctively think Mark was home. Freedom, I learned, doesn't always arrive feeling like freedom. Sometimes it feels like an empty chair at the kitchen table. So I started changing things. Nothing dramatic. I bought a new mattress. I painted Mark's old office a soft cream and turned it into a reading room. I moved my mother's ceramic mugs back into the kitchen cabinet. I hired someone to repair the loose railing on the back steps that Mark had promised to fix for 6 years. Then spring arrived. I went outside. Gardening had always been mine. Not Mark's, not ours, mine. I spent 2 Saturdays clearing dead leaves and pulling weeds. My knees protested every time I stood up. By Sunday afternoon, my lower back was so stiff I had to walk around the kitchen like somebody twice my age. Linda came over carrying lemonade. You realize normal people hire teenagers to do this? I like doing it. You're walking like a cowboy. Go home, Linda. She sat down on my porch. I brought cookies. You can stay. That was how most of my healing happened, not through big revelations, through ordinary Tuesdays and Saturdays, coffee with Linda, work, a good book, a quiet dinner. Learning that I could watch whatever I wanted on television without somebody complaining about it. Then Walter arrived. He was an 8-year-old golden retriever at a rescue outside Noblesville. Gray around the muzzle, slightly overweight, one ear folded differently from the other. The volunteer told me his previous owner had gone into assisted living. Walter walked over, put his enormous head against my leg, and sighed. I understood him immediately. Linda looked at me. You're taking him home. I haven't decided. Walter sat on my foot. You've been chosen. 20 minutes later, I was filling out paperwork. On the drive home, Walter drooled across half the back seat of my Subaru. Linda twisted around to look at him. You already spent 30 years training one stubborn male. At least this one might listen. I laughed so hard I had to pull into a Speedway parking lot. That was the first time I laughed about Mark without bitterness underneath it. I heard things about him occasionally. Carmel isn't a small town exactly, but it's small enough that news travels when people have known each other for years. Mark rented an apartment on the northwest side of Indianapolis. He sold one remaining interest in a development project. His attorney worked with lenders regarding the debts. There was no dramatic arrest, no mysterious billionaire arriving to punish him, no judge ordering him to live under a bridge. He simply had to deal with the obligations he'd spent years avoiding. That seemed fair. Vanessa never came back. I heard she had moved to another apartment complex downtown. She sent me one message, about 2 months after the divorce. I almost deleted it. It said, I'm sorry, not just for the suitcase, for all of it. I stared at the screen. Then I typed, I hope you learned something. She answered, I did. That was the end of our relationship. And honestly, that was enough. One April morning, I sat on the back porch with coffee while Walter snored beside my chair. The dog could sleep through anything except the sound of a cheese wrapper. The yard was beginning to turn green. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Gray roots showing, lines around my eyes, 25 extra pounds that weren't going anywhere quickly. For years, I had quietly treated those things like evidence. Evidence that maybe Mark had stopped noticing me because I had failed some test. I wasn't young enough, thin enough, interesting enough. Then I thought about what Mark had actually wanted. Admiration without responsibility, a woman who saw the watch but didn't see the bill. Someone who believed the story he told about himself. That had nothing to do with my waistline. Getting older hadn't destroyed my marriage. It had simply given me enough experience to finally recognize what had been wrong with it. Knees still hurt. I still sometimes missed having someone beside me at dinner. And there were nights when 30 years of memories felt heavier than I wanted them to. Healing didn't erase any of that. It just stopped those things from controlling what came next. The funny part was, Mark had spent months telling everyone I'd ruined him. For a while, that bothered me. Then, one morning, I realized something so simple I couldn't believe it had taken me this long. I hadn't ruined Mark, I hadn't created his debts, I hadn't signed his guarantees, I hadn't made him lie to Vanessa, and I certainly hadn't forced him to walk into our home with another woman and tell his wife she'd been replaced. All I had done was stop standing between a grown man and the consequences of his own choices. For years, I thought loving someone meant helping carry their burdens. What I didn't understand was that if you carry another adult long enough, eventually they can forget they were ever supposed to walk. Mark thought I took everything from him. I didn't. I just stopped rescuing him. And in the end, that was enough. If you've ever had to stop rescuing someone you loved, you probably understand why that can be harder than leaving. If you feel comfortable, tell me about it in the comments. Thank you for spending this time with me.